Alright, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan, and what I want to share with you today is something that I'm calling the Farmhouse Pinterest desk. So like many people, we are working from home, and my wife did not have a very good desk situation. So she came to me with a Pinterest photo, and I really need a desk quick. So that's kind of the theme of this project. It's something that I wanted to make pretty quickly. Didn't want to spend a ton of money on this. And it had to look like this farmhouse Pinterest thing that we had going on here. So the whole thing was built for less than $100 or right around $100, and there isn't any crazy woodworking joints or anything like that in here. Just pretty simple, straightforward, and it was all built with nominal size lumber, which is something that I really haven't done before. I think it came out pretty well. You can see behind me it's already being used. So I hope you guys stick around and see how we did this. All right, so the first step is planning things out, and for me being a CAD teacher, I need to 3D model things. It gives me exact sizes for the pieces of wood that I'm going to be cutting, and it gives me a parts list so I know exactly what to buy. This isn't exactly necessary. A simple sketch would do the trick. All right, so once I had my plan, I went to Lowe's and I bought the lumber. I bought 4x4s, 2x8s, and 2x4s. These are nominal size lumber, Douglas fir or pine boards that would normally be used for framing, but for this project it's going to work perfect, and it's going to be a way that we can reduce the price. Overall lumber cost on this one was right around $100. Then the next step that I took that was really it's optional is running all the boards through the planer. So I ran the 4x4s and the 2x4s through the planer. I took a 1/16 of an inch off each side. It cleans up each side and it really sharpens up the corners. Then the 2x8s that I used for the top, I ran through the planer, ran them through the joiner, and then the table saw so that they're all square to each other so that they're going to glue up really nice. This isn't necessarily a mandatory step, but I think it really helps the overall quality of the table. Now it was time to start measuring and cutting all the pieces that I needed to make the legs. So then I started cutting down the 4x4s to size. All the pieces for the bottom and the top of the legs needed to be 18 inches long, and then I mitered the corners of each one of those to give them a nice beveled look. I also cut out 22-inch long pieces that were the vertical components to get the proper height that I was looking for. The last thing that I needed to cut were the 2x4s, so I cut them down to length and then cut a miter on either side. The angle will vary depending on the length of the piece that you're cutting. It was really nice for me because I had that 3D CAD model that told me the exact angle that I was cutting those on. Once I had all the pieces cut for the legs, then I just needed to go into assembly. And to assemble these, I'm just going to pre-drill them, screw them, and glue them together. I repeated that same process on the other side until I had both the top and the bottom screwed to the middle component, flipped it on its side, and then you can see here that I'm pre-drilling those holes with a countersink bit, and then putting in a 2-inch wood screw. Then came the corner leg in the back, and this one was almost the same as the other two legs, except it was in a corner. So the top and bottom pieces were mitered so that they would come together at a 90-degree angle or a corner, and then they were pretty much assembled the same exact way that I did the other two legs. The next step was to work on the 4x4 pieces that were going to hold the legs together. So these were going to be the pieces that connected each leg together and that helped support the tabletop itself. So I cut these to size, and then I needed to make a joint, a lap joint, for them to intersect each other. So this is probably the most woodworking intensive part of this. And this can be done a bunch of different ways. You can see that I'm doing it on a table saw, but you don't necessarily need a table saw. You can use a chisel. A circular saw can be used as well. Just taking your time and cutting halfway through each 4x4 is all that's really required. So once I was done on the table saw, then I took a chisel and really cleaned up those edges so that the one 4x4 fit into the other 4x4 where they were flush, and it was a nice tight joint. Once the lap joint was done, I went through and I put pocket hole screws, or Kreg jig screws, on each side. 2 on every side, top and bottom. And then I temporarily screwed them into the leg that they were connected to. All right, now you can see that I'm going to attach all the legs together. So I had these set up, because I'm working by myself, I had these set up roughly where I wanted them. And then I pulled them all together, make sure that all the joints fit together real well. Clamped them in place. I did check them for square to make sure that before I screwed everything in, everything was square and where I wanted it. And then I just went ahead and put all the Kreg jig screws in. You can see that I'm not using any glue here, so that I have the option down the road. If I ever need to take this thing apart, whether it's moving it into another room and it doesn't fit through the doorway or whatever, I still have the option to take the table apart and it's not solidly glued together. I also pre-drilled and countersunk 2 holes in the top to connect these 2 4x4s together. This will help it stay a little bit stronger and stay square. All right, the next thing that I needed to tackle was filling those screw holes. So I went to Lowe's and I bought this plug cutter, I want to call it. And normally I'm used to using one of these on a drill press. This one was okay and it worked fine. It cut all of these little wooden plugs for me, but it was burning and smoking more than I've ever seen one of these things do so. It worked fine, but was a little sketchy at some points. Once you have all the plugs cut, I just use a screwdriver to pop these things out. Then I put a little bit of glue on each one of them and firmly press them into the hole, and then used a hammer, a slight tap of a rubber mallet to pound them into the hole so that we could cut them off and sand them later. Now I had to cut and assemble the top. Yet again, when assembling the top of this table, or when making the top of this table, I wasn't doing anything fancy. Sometimes on traditional tables, you'll use biscuits or dowels, or different ways of attaching those boards together. For me, I was keeping it simple and going with Kreg jig screws. These pocket hole or Kreg jig screws are an amazing way to hold things together. They're super easy, they're super strong, and then combined with wood glue, these things are almost indestructible. You can see that I'm standing on these boards. I'll be honest with you, I was trying to do this as much like a normal DIY homeowner doing this in your garage as possible. So I'm not using any fancy clamps or anything. I just have a set of 4x4s, extra boards actually, extra 4x4s from this project that I didn't use sitting on the ground to give me a nice smooth surface. And then I'm just clamping these things together, standing on them, and screwing them in there after I've applied glue to each edge. So really, this is something that anybody can do in their garage without too much effort, or fancy tools for that matter. So once the top was made, I did have extra hanging over on either end, and I did this on purpose so that I could come back with a circular saw and make a nice clean cut so that each one of these boards was exactly the same length. All right, then there was the fun of sanding the tabletop. First, I started off with a belt sander with 80 grit sandpaper, and that took off the big discrepancies between boards. And I'll be honest, it really wasn't that bad. When I did glue it up, I got them pretty flush against each other by standing on them and really putting a lot of pressure on them. But then I came back after I was done with the belt sander with the palm sander with 80 grit sandpaper again. Then I made another complete pass over the table with 120, and then I made a third pass over the table with 240 grit sandpaper. Then the plugs were cut off, sanded down, and now you would really never even know the screws were there. So with sticking in the theme of the farmhouse style desk, I went ahead and painted the bottom white. You could whitewash this. I'll be honest, I just put on a really thin coat of ultra gloss like cabinet paint, and it was really nice because you can see the grain pattern through it still, but it does have that nice vibrant white color to it. All right, so I just couldn't help myself when I was finishing the table. I went over the table again for a fourth time with 320 grit sandpaper just to make sure it was extra smooth. The finish that I used this time was called Polyshades, something that I'm not accustomed to using. This is a one-step process, a stain and polyurethane all in one step. Normally, I'm used to applying the stain and then a coat of polyurethane over top. But I really have to say this stuff worked pretty well, and I used an all-natural, all-stains brush by Valspar. When I was applying this, I was probably in a little bit of a hurry or rushing it a little bit, and I put it on a little bit too fast. My recommendation to you is go slow. Make sure that your first coat is fairly thin and even, and you'll have some really good results with this stuff. All right, so the next morning, once the first coat was completely cured, I used 320 grit sandpaper and a sanding block to lightly go over the top of the surface and just sand out any imperfections. And then I removed the dust and dirt with a cloth and a tack cloth. I really like the way that this finish turned out. It's very glossy and very bright and vibrant and colorful. I did have some mistakes in here. There are a few imperfections, but I do like those brush strokes and imperfections. I think it actually really adds to the farmhouse kind of worn style that we were going for. Next was to make the top of the table to the legs, and I did this by flipping the tabletop over onto a sheet so we didn't scratch it or damage it in any way. Put the legs on top of it. I did have to move them around and adjust them so that you get the even spacing on all sides. And then I just went through, pre-drilled the holes with a countersink bit and screwed them in with 4-inch long wood screws. And I used wood screws with no glue yet again so that I could take the legs off of the table so that in case we needed to move this yet again to another room or to another house, the thing would easily come apart and be moved. All right, so the last step of the project was to drill a 2-inch hole in the top of the table so that we could put in our wire grommet. The way that I did this was I put over painter's tape over top of the table to help protect the finish, especially around where we were drilling. I marked out the center point of where I wanted the hole to go. Then using a Forstner bit, I drilled that hole through. And it was kind of a slow process with a handheld drill. It's really nice if you could use a drill press for this, but the handheld drill worked perfectly fine. All right, so I finished the desk late on a Sunday night, and we immediately moved it into the room where it was going. And my wife was super excited that she immediately started setting up her stuff. So this is actually the only picture that I have of the desk when there's nothing on it, when it's not being used. But I did want to give you some of the dimensions. It's 4 feet long by 6 feet long. The width of the top is 21 inches, and then it sits 30 inches off of the ground. And the awesome thing about this desk is it can be customized or manipulated to any size that you need or to fit the room that it's going to go in. All right, so what you're looking at behind me is the final and finished product, and you can see that my wife has set up shop and she's already using it. There's stuff all over the desk. It seemed like a big desk when I built it, but in all reality, once she gets all her stuff on here, it really gets taken up pretty quick. So far she likes it and everything's going all right. Is it perfect? Did I do everything 100% correct? No, I learned a lot from this project. Working with nominal size lumber was definitely, a different task than what I'm used to using hardwoods. But overall, it was quick, it was easy, it's getting the job done, she likes it, it looks like the picture, so it's a win-win for me. I'm really looking forward to what you guys think and what you think of this project, so please let me know down in the comments what you think, things that I can improve upon this, or let other people know what you would do differently. But as always, if you liked it, please hit the like button. If you are enjoying some of this content or you're looking for some other projects that I'm going to be doing, moving some of these projects indoors over the winter, I encourage you guys to hit the subscribe button so you can see all my future content. But other than that, I hope to see you guys in another video.